Canada's Liberals win again. Did Donald Trump seal their victory? Threats of making Canada the 51st U.S. state rallied Canadians across the political spectrum and delivered a hard blow to Conservatives. So how will the new Prime Minister capitalize on Canadian unity and manage the economy in the face of brazen U.S. tariffs? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Canada. In his 10 years as Canada's Liberal Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau went from being celebrated to stigmatized. Many believed his resignation earlier this year meant the end of Liberal Party rule. And like many other Western democracies, Canada was witnessing the rise of the right. But then came U.S. President Donald Trump. His conservative leadership across the border managed to insult so many Canadians that the country's own Conservatives found themselves tainted by it. The party everyone thought was done for now finds itself in charge again. So what will new Prime Minister Mark Carney really be able to deliver in the face of huge global and local economic challenges? Here's a look.
Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me?
Mark Carney and the Liberal Party of Canada celebrating their recent election victory.
As we come here after this most consequential election, let's put an end to the division and anger of the past. We are all Canadian, and my government will work for and with everyone.
Carney did not win an outright majority. He will still have to lead Canada as Prime Minister of a minority government dependent on some support from minor parties, something his main rival, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who lost his own seat in Parliament, pointed out in his own concession speech.
Canadians have opted for a razor-thin minority government, a virtual tie in the vote count. So I would like to congratulate Prime Minister Carney on leading this minority government.
But Carney's chances and eventual victory were significantly boosted in the lead-up to the election, as the US President and Donald Trump loomed large.
I would say definitely the threat coming from the US. That would be the number one issue. It wasn't at first, but it's gained traction over time. And it's become the number one reason for my vote.
Everything changed with the emergence of Mark Carney. The country's economy took precedence over my choices. That's why I'm going to vote Liberal, something I honestly wasn't going to do before.
Mark Carney took over from Justin Trudeau after Trudeau resigned as Prime Minister amid plummeting approval ratings following nearly a decade in power. When Carney replaced him as Liberal Party leader and Prime Minister, before this election, he became the first Canadian Prime Minister not to have any previous legislative or cabinet experience. But events south of the border seemed only to boost Carney's political chances.
What I'd like to see, Canada become our 51st state. We give them protection, military protection.
Despite his relative inexperience politically, his robust response to US tariff policies and Trump's talks of annexation resonated with Canadians, who viewed the US president's statements, jokes or not, as insults bordering on direct threats. After he became leader, Carney placed 25% retaliatory tariffs on US goods coming into Canada, after the US president put the same on Canadian goods going into the USA, as well as various tariffs on Canadian energy. Carney has a background in banking, over 13 years at Goldman Sachs in London, New York, and Japan. He was Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada and later Governor of Canada's Central Bank. He also became the first non-British Governor of the Bank of England in 2013. Trump, tariffs, and annexation preoccupied the minds of many Canadians, but issues of housing and cost of living affordability also affected the outcome of this election. with a new Prime Minister who gained popularity and won an election partly for his defiance of an antagonistic US president. What now lays in Canada's future?
So, did Trump's language give the Liberals a temporary boost or change the actual trajectory of Canadian politics? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Vancouver, independent politician and human rights advocate Kabir Kurban, from Calgary, founder of Moody's Private Client, Kim Moody, and from Toronto, lawyer and public affairs commentator Kofi Achampong. Thanks all so much for being with me. You know what? Let's start with this victory, especially considering record high voter turnout. Is it just circumstantial, or does it really represent kind of a complete change in tide away from conservative politics because of Donald Trump? Kim, I'll start with you.
No, actually, I don't think it does signal a lean from conservative politics. I think quite the opposite. The Conservatives, comparatively from 2021, did quite well. But I think your opening comment about Donald Trump is correct. There is certainly some significant interference and fear-stoking amongst a lot of Canadians, especially older Canadians. And so that certainly didn't help the conservative movement, and I'm pretty sure we'll see better results next time.
Okay, well, let me ask Kabir if you agree there, because if I'm not mistaken, you'd actually said that conservatives weren't really blaming Donald Trump. They were blaming Liberals for their losses in the polls. And so seeing the results now, do you still say the same?
100%. I'd like to think that since the candidacy of Carney, there wasn't really much offense maneuvers. There wasn't really any policy development. Rather, it was just trying to bandwagon on that idea of liberal government or Trudeau did something, where in fact, we see that shift. We see that wave that came in.
Okay, explain though, when did you see it really come in?
You know, really prior to the stepping down of Justin Trudeau, a lot of the talking points were very targeted and very specific towards Justin Trudeau himself. But then after that, that has not changed, even though Mark Carney came in and he switched the initial things that were the topic, the carbon tax, that was really weighing heavy on the shoulders of the consumer. And first thing he did was actually take that out, leaving conservative government with very little talking points when it came down to the debate.
Okay. Kim, if you want to respond quickly as a conservative, go ahead. If not, I'll move on to Kofi.
Well, I think it's baloney what the gentleman just said. Certainly the talking points were changed, especially when Trump came in and threatened, 51st state and what have you. But in terms of policy development, the Conservatives were really the only ones that put out policies, significant policies. I kept track on my personal website of all the policies from a tax perspective that were laid out, and they're significant, whereas the Liberals basically have nothing. And so do I think that, the Liberals have a significant mandate here to govern? No, they don't. You just have to look at the numbers, and to suggest that, the Liberals won because they're a better option, I think is foolhardy.
Okay. Let me turn to Kofi, though, quickly, because I'd like to really speak more specifically then about the economy and how confident you might be that Mark Carney is the best person to lead now in terms of the economy.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think really what Carney presented for the country was someone who people felt like was an experienced manager of finances. He's a former Bank of Canada governor, Bank of England governor. I believe, probably perhaps one of the very few people in the world to have ever been head of two major central banks. So he presents himself as someone who is an internationalist, understands global finance, understands economics, understands what makes economies successful. And I think in many ways what that does is signal to markets, signal to the private sector, signals to consumers and to business people that this is someone who will understand the challenges that we're experiencing, the needs that we have right now in light of the threats being that we're facing under Donald Trump. So he certainly gives the perception that we have a competent manager at the helm right now in Canada.
You also brought up as reference, really, from what I understand, in 2008 and 2009, you said that it was Mark Carney who single-handedly kept Canada out of the worst of the global financial crisis, and that Canada wants stability now in a similar way, and that's why people are voting for him. So let me ask Kabir if you would agree with that analysis as well.
Definitely. Just when you look at our money, even all of the printed bills actually have a signature. So we are very well acquainted with his work, and we have been welcoming him to come back actually right now to be the leader of the Liberal Party, considering that there was 9 years of repetition that some may say because of the Trudeau government. Overall, this is, I think, very it's exciting times, to say the least. There's a lot of stuff up in the air. And I think that Mark Carney was the best person, considering that he was the only party leader that actually won his seat. Not the only, but looking at Poilievre, he's projected to lose his own seat in his riding, and as well as Jagmeet Singh, who has announced himself to step down from the leader of the NDP.
Yeah, Kim, go ahead and tell me why you believe the opposite is actually true on the economic front.
While Canada's been one of the worst performers economically over the last 10 years, and despite the guest's assertion that his name is printed on the currency of Canada, which is true, by the way. But having said that, he's a very unknown in Canada until the leadership. I do think the other guest's assertion that that he presents himself as a stable option in light of the Trump chaos is true. But in terms of exciting times, Mr. Carney was behind the scenes with the Liberal Party for the last 5 years, and to suggest that he's an economic savior and knows what he's doing. His performance at the Bank of England was horrendous, and to say that he single-handedly got Canada through the financial crisis is exaggeration to the extreme. And I would suggest that anybody that believes that should take a short history lesson. So, so the short answer is Canada's in for a rough time here.
Okay.
For the next short while.
Kofi, I'll give you another chance to explain why you think Canada is really on the best footing now with Carney going forward.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify. I didn't say he single-handedly saved Canada. Of course, he was instrumental, obviously, as the head of the Bank of Canada at the time during the global economic crises. His management of the economy, of Canadian interest rates, was crucial and critical to giving overall confidence to the Canadian economy at the time. But of course, lots of different decisions were made at various levels of government that ensured that Canada didn't bear a tremendous brunt of the downturn in the economy during that particular time. That being said, I think Mark Carney is seen as a sort of a liberal, pragmatist, centrist, really. Someone who understands the world now at a time when we see essentially, the United States backtracking from multilateralism, from internationalism. He's made it very clear that if the United States won't lead, then Canada might have to lead. And I think in many ways what that signals is that we have an opportunity here in Canada to work with global partners. If you had read the Liberal Party platform during the campaign, they made it very clear that they weren't going to be backtracking in the face of U.S. isolationism, U.S. desire to limit global trade, that Canada was going to press forward. Canada was going to be a reliable partner for global markets. Canada was going to be a country that would work with its European, Asian partners. So I think what it really says to the world is that Canada is a reliable partner in North America, and that we have somebody who Europe and other parts of the world can rely on to work with to address major global issues.
You got it. Let me ask Kim then very quickly, Kim. Do you think President Trump actually then regrets his language with Canada, because now he really has something that's much more of an adversary across the border rather than an ally?
No, I don't think he does. I mean, I think as the world has seen, he's a hard fellow to predict. I think he's um, to make it quick, I don't think he regrets it in the least bit, and I think he thinks he'll bully his way into getting whatever he wants with Canada anyhow. To think that Carney will be able to deal with him more effectively again is an exaggeration.
Okay. Kabir, if you have a comment, you can go ahead, but I'd actually like to move
Yeah,
on to foreign policy. Go ahead.
definitely.
Go
I'm
ahead.
just gonna say that Trump is predictable. He does what he says he's gonna do, and I think in a time like this, we are very much prepared as we weren't in the past couple of weeks.
Okay. I'll tell you what, moving on now well, predictability will be an issue here as well, or lack thereof, as we look at wider geopolitical foreign policy now. And we just heard Ukrainian President Zelensky say today that the Canadian-Ukrainian partnership will only grow under Mark Carney. Would you agree that there might be a better relationship between Canada and Ukraine, especially defense-wise? And how else might Mark Carney actually shape Canada's foreign policy or change Canada's foreign policy going forward?
This is a very tough question, really, to answer. But in general, I'd like to think that Mark Carney's remarks were in trying to unify the world. He said that we do not need America, that we need to decouple from their economy. As much as we are reliant on them being, right down under, they have been acting like a troll under the bridge. And unfortunately, we're tired of every time having to cross over a bridge and having to pay a certain tariff. So yes, I think this will require us to look elsewhere to build stronger relationships, whether it would be with the EU. And unfortunately, as a human rights advocate, I wonder if this means stronger relations with China.
Why, as a human rights advocate, does that concern you?
When we try to normalize foreign trade relationships with nations that have been accused of human rights atrocities, this becomes a topic to which often you can brush over. Accepting the dollar bills over human lives, it becomes very murky waters, to say the least. I understand that Canada is in an economic struggle point where we do need to make sure that we are building relationships, that we are strengthening ourselves, but to not do that at the cost of someone else's livelihood.
Kofi, how wide of a concern do you think that is for Canadians? We have seen Canada be somewhat sensitive than I guess the average, maybe, towards human rights issues. But then again, if you ask where this leaves, Canada's relationship with China, we remember Canada had actually acquiesced to the United States under Trump demands for, the extradition of Meng Wanzhou, the Princess of Huawei. So where do you think this kind of Canada-China cooperation will stand going forward?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, Canada's relationship with China has been somewhat uncertain over the last few years. We've had many challenging issues between Canada and China over the years. There is certainly a sense that with a Carney government that this is a new opportunity to reorient some of that relationship, to initiate conversations that perhaps may have faltered because of past issues. You mentioned the issue of Huawei. Of course, there was the issue of the two Canadian two Michaels. Canada has been outspoken about Chinese interference in Canada through cyber attacks. So there's certainly a lot at stake here. And of course, Canada has an Indo-Pacific strategy. That a 5-year, $3.5 billion Indo-Pacific strategy that in many ways some would read as an effort to counter China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific. So I think it remains to be seen what kind of approach Canada hopes to take with China, given in particular that the U.S. is, of course, becoming increasingly more hostile toward China, and Canada has to find a way to be quite nuanced in that sense. Canada is going to be leading the G7 countries And we'll see how Canada works with its U.S. partners and other European partners as well to discuss some of these sensitive issues in relation to China.
Yeah, Kim, it's interesting if Kofi mentioning the U.S. hostility, particularly toward China, and what that might aggravate in geopolitical terms, potentially leaving Canada in the lurch here, because one of the things Trump had said about the reason he thinks Canada should become the 51st state is because the U.S. can provide this military protection that Canada is going to need. What do you think?
Well, I think the average Canadian has no interest in acquiescing to a 51st state. Yes, there's good arguments on the economic side that perhaps getting rid of the border might float everyone's boat up, upwards. But I don't think you're going to find a broad consensus for that amongst average Canadians. And in terms of trying to just comment on a couple of other quick things that were mentioned by the guests, trying to decouple our economy from the United States, that's just impossible. It's a geographic reality. It's huge historically and huge economically. Do we need to diversify? Yes, but we've needed to do that for many decades, and so this is not a new thing. I think the Trump chaos has simply just magnified that need. And the last thing I'll comment on is I think the average Canadian has absolutely zero tolerance or very little tolerance for a cozied up relationship with China. And frankly, if Mr. Carney decides to go down that path, in my view, that will cost him at the polls. My prediction is that this is a short-lived government. It does not have the mandate that certainly Mr. Carney wanted. My guess is we'll go back to the polls within the next 12 to 18 months, maybe 24 at the outset.
Kofi, I can see you disagree with that. Kabir, let me ask you if you disagree as well. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, though. If Carney and the Liberal Party can form a relatively straightforward coalition, they'll have a decent majority, especially with Mr. Javneet Singh's party, now that he's resigned. Would it be pretty straightforward to form that majority government together?
Yeah, I mean, the Liberals, of course, would have loved to have gotten the majority. I have to take a bit of umbrage with what my friend is saying, because I don't know what is what there's the rejection of conservative politics at this particular time couldn't be more clear. I mean, the Conservatives had a 20-point lead in the polls. 3 months ago, you couldn't have told anybody realistically that the Liberals were going to form government. The Conservatives have looked like they were the government in waiting for almost 2 years now. And within a span of 3-4 months, they've been relegated to opposition. Now, they weren't entirely decimated, don't get me wrong, but essentially they've lost to a brand new politician, someone who had no seat in the legislature, someone who a lot of Canadians don't even really know, to be quite frank. So, the fact that Pierre Poilievre, who's been a lifelong politician as the leader of the Conservatives, lost his seat this time around, the fact that he was leading in the polls considerably and was, by most accounts of prognosticators, expected to become the prime minister and was essentially waiting to become prime minister, didn't close the deal. It's a tremendous indictment on the type of politics that he's relied on to put him in power.
Okay.
So I really have to disagree a little bit with what
Can I comment on that?
Very quickly, Kim, because we're down to our last minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. That's a way oversimplification of simple talking points of the Liberals. If you look at the vote count, the Conservatives outperformed and did their best vote count since 1988. So that alone speaks that their seat count increased. This is a lot more complicated than a simple fall of conservative politics. In other words, it's a rise in conservative politics. And mark my words, 18 to 24 months, we'll see a change.
Okay. Well, we'll follow up with you in another program then in that time and see where we're at. But, Kabir, we're down to our last few minutes. So I'd like to turn inward, look a little bit more at Canada's internal politics and how well you think this new leadership is going to work with regional partners, not least, you know, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, who usually defends more conservative economic policy, even though he and Carney are at least on the same page over Trump right now.
Most definitely. The one thing I love about Canada and love being a Canadian is because I could talk to Kim and I could talk to all of our guests here and I could extend my hand over the aisle and smile at them and say, we need to work together. Even though we may have our disagreements, there is no hostility. We need to make sure that we boost our morale. And this is the morale boost that the local Canadian government needed. And I think that, yes, there will be some growing pains. There's a new kid on the block that everyone's getting, acquainted with. And it is a bit exciting. It's really murky waters to make a prediction. I'm sure some of the guests are optimistic about the fall of the party, but for the sake of Canada, I do pray that this lasts a full term and that they are successful. And that when next time the polls come around and the election time comes around, we can try this again. And numbers speak for themselves. Unfortunately, Pierre, for him, he lost his own seat, right? We don't even know if he will continue to be the leader of his party.
Okay, Javier, that will unfortunately have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us. Our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.